Hi, I'm Albuquerque City Council President Ken Sanchez, and with me today is my colleague on the Albuquerque City Council, Don Harris. Both Don and I got elected to office back in 2005. We took the oath of office 9 years ago today, Don. Tell me a little bit about yourself and the district.
Well, thank you, Ken. Well, I'm the city councilor, as you know, for District 9, and we're both serving in our third term right now. And in addition to being a city councilor, I'm also a lawyer in private practice. I happen to be the only lawyer on the city council right now, which kind of gives me sort of a burden in a way of having to actually understand some of these things that other councilors might not understand in terms of appeals and so forth. Also married and have several kids, and just real busy, being a professional like you are, as well as being a city councilor and having a family.
And I know that you and I had an opportunity. National Adoption Day has always been a big day for you. The day that you adopted your son, my son-in-law adopted my granddaughter. It was a really wonderful day, and you've been a real champion in showing up and being a real advocate for these young children that have been adopted. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Oh, sure. And that's something that you and I have done together, of course, with the zoo, getting passes for foster families, people who are in the foster care system, and giving some benefit to those folks who really work hard for kids who oftentimes have some problems. That's why they're in the foster care system, because you have to have been an abused and neglected child to be in foster care. And National Adoption Day, one of the things that it does is really seeks to put a spotlight on those families in that process and getting kids adopted who are difficult to adopt, and also just to celebrate adoption in general, because there's so many social benefits to adoption that have been proven, and it really benefits the families, but it especially benefits these children.
And again, it's been 9 years that both you and I have been in office. This year, by far, I think has probably been the most challenging. Why don't you express your feelings about 2014 and the challenges that we faced?
Well, we certainly had the first city council takeover, and it's in a very important topic, the police and community relations, and I think we've handled it really well, actually. The only problem that we have coming up, both you and I, in terms of how we're going to pay for some of the reforms that the Department of Justice is demanding and that are it was essentially sort of a consent decree was going to require. But in the long run, it never hurts to have police officers have better training. It never hurts to have police officers have better training dealing with people with mental illness. And that's all over the country. There's been articles in the New York Times about this, and that a lot of the conflicts that police forces all over the country are having are with people with mental illness. And as you may know, the biggest mental health institution in the state of New Mexico right now is the Bernalillo County, or actually it's called the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC. And the Metropolitan Detention Center is the largest mental health facility we have in the state of New Mexico, and it's really because of people who are have mental illness are folks who often end up in the criminal justice system in one way or another. So we have the jail being the largest mental health facility, and outside of the jail we have all these conflicts with the sheriff's department, with the police department, and a lot of these conflicts have ended tragically, as we know, and we really want to get a handle on this and have better training for our police officers so that we don't have these tragic endings to these things, that when we have a conflict between police officers and people with mental illness, that we're able to de-escalate the situation and keep everyone safe.
And I think one of the challenges that we face as a council is with the settlement agreement is going to be the cost associated to the settlement agreement. There is talk that it's going to cost approximately $6 million for the first 2 years and maybe $4 million for the last 2 years. And we've got to make sure that we provide the proper funding to assure that we are not in violation of the consent decree, and I think it's going to be important. So
it's going to be a real point. If you consider that our general budget is really only in the $500 million range, we have more money that we spend, which is dedicated to programs which are actually funded by particular receipts, like the airport and solid waste and so forth. Those agencies are actually funded by the revenue that they generate, but for the most part, our so-called general fund revenues, you got $500 million, more or less. And then we have $5 million. You can see that's like, what, 1% of our total budget. And the city has been doing a very good job of doing more with less the last several years. So just finding an extra 1%, and that's not going to be easy. So we're going to have to be creative, and we might have to raise revenue. We'll have to talk about that. It's going to be a difficult conversation.
That will be, but again, I think we must make sure that we provide the necessary resources and funding to conform with that settlement agreement, because it's important. And I felt the part of that finding was staffing. was
Yep.
also included in there. And I think we need more men and women working on the streets of the Albuquerque Police Department. Right now, I think we're really understaffed. Cities that are comparable to Albuquerque, Tucson, I think have like 1,400 officers. We're under 1,000 police officers.
And I agree with you. I think we can never have too many police officers. Well, you probably can't have too many, but as compared to 1,000 versus 1,300, it's hard to make the argument that 1,300 would be not better than 1,000. I think it certainly would be. But if you think about every police officer, by the time you have a police vehicle for that police officer, as well as that police officer's salary, which is anywhere from a mid-range police officer, you're talking 50, 60,000 plus benefits. You're talking close to $100,000 per year. So if you have 3,000 extra or more police officers and you take that times 100,000 per year, you can see very quickly that this is going to cost some money to actually get our staffing up in the police department, as well as do what we have to do for the Justice Department, because those are actually two separate components. But I think they actually are related, because if you have a situation like we do where the police officers are just going from call to call to call, they're not doing the community policing. We'd like to have more police officers actually doing community policing, more proactive work, getting to know the people in the community, getting to know where the problems are in advance. And that does take more bodies. It takes more boots on the ground.
And let's talk about your district, District 9. You've been representing the district now for 9 years, and a lot of great things are happening in Council District 9. Why don't you talk about some of those issues and initiatives that you've got moving forward?
Well, what we'd like to talk about is things that people don't really know about in terms of District 9. Well, District 9, first of all, is the far southeast part of the city, although because Central runs to the very southeast corner of the city, some of it's actually technically in the northeast, but it's actually the southeast square of the city. It's east of Eubank and south of Manal. And in terms of redistricting, some of there are some controversies about redistricting. There always are, but one thing that's kind of nice about the redistricting map is it's actually easier to describe a district than it is for, let's say, the state legislators, who will have to sometimes sit down with you and say 5 minutes before they actually get done describing the boundaries of the district. In a lot of city council districts, they're very easy. East of Eubank, south of Manal. What a lot of people don't realize is that we have some interesting environmental assets and open space assets, or potential open space assets, in that area of the city. We have the Tejeras Arroyo, which actually drains about 70 square miles of the Manzano Mountains and some of the Sandias. And when it's fully filled with water after a big snow or rain, it actually carries almost as much water as the Rio Grande. But most of the time it's dry. But we do have back right towards the edge of the city boundaries, there's like a cottonwood forest back in there. But what we have in the Tejeras Arroyo is this patchwork of private ownerships of land that is really undevelopable. And what we're doing is we just passed a resolution which would create this thing called the Tejeras Arroyo Biozone, which the long-term plan for that is to somehow get in public control all this patchwork of private property. There's public property, there's APS owns some, the County of Bernalillo owns some, the City of Albuquerque is acquiring more and more. But eventually we'd like to control it all, either through conservation easements or through purchase, and then make this an open space asset and improve the quality of life for the people of the city, especially the people in that area of the city. But this really could be a great asset in terms of the open space in our city, because that's one thing that makes the city of Albuquerque a really unique place, is the amount of open space that we have. We also have an archaeological site, which we just passed that resolution recently also. We may have, we don't know, but we may have the initial settlement of Carnaway right behind what used to be Albertsons, right in that Fort Hills area. If you go back there, there's a big fenced-off area, and there's an archaeological site that is of some importance. We don't know if it's super important. We don't know if it's from the 1500s or the 1700s, but it is a historically significant site. We've just had it fenced off for a while. We're actually going to get in there and see what's there, and we'd like to perhaps have an open-air museum. And of course, what you and I both have is Central Avenue, which has been just a real tough, rope to pull, I guess, or sometimes it feels like you're pushing on that rope in terms of getting redevelopment on either East or West Central. And it's just so important to our district, because in my area you have a lot of fairly nice development all around Central, but Central itself isn't really coming back as fast as we'd like, and we're doing a whole lot to move that process along. We have a lot of things in the works, but really I think the the recession that hit in 2007, 2008 really slowed all that whole process down of redevelopment. And we're seeing some signs of it, and I think it's going to come around.
And people think there's a tug of war going on between you and I, me tugging to the west and you tugging to the east, trying to create development in your district, myself on the west side. But real quickly, let's talk briefly about the BRT. We both went to Cleveland to look at the BRT. And again, they're talking about the core of the city, but we're fighting to make sure that the BRT is also included in Tramway and all the way up to 98th Street. Why don't you briefly talk about that?
Sure. We did go to Cleveland, and I, interestingly enough, I've been talking to neighborhood associations in my area, and I think a decade ago, the attitude was different than it is now. I think people realize that the city of Albuquerque has to really compete with other cities nationally, and people realize that we have to have some of these urban amenities if we're going to really advance and have a good live-work environment for the millennials and for other people. When they come into the city of Albuquerque, they want to be able to get around the tourists. Now we have the train that goes from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, but I think we also would ideally like to have some really good public transportation that gets people from downtown to other parts of the city. And if we can get that happening, if we can find a way to fund it, I think that would be something that really could be good for my end of Central as well as your end of Central in terms of really trying to spur development.
Councilor Harris, we are out of time. Real quickly,
Okay.
why don't you let people know where they can contact you?
Please call my office at 768-3123, and my assistant is Lindsay Burkhard, and you can also just click on the website, and all that information is there. And I know you, as well as we get back to people promptly, and I'm always happy to meet with my constituents.
Councilor Harris, thank you for your time, and I look
Thank
forward
you.
to working with you in the future.
You too.